Welcome back to the Innovations Edge right here on your Disruptive AF podcast, where we are keeping you up to date with not only your realm of innovation, but how you can get involved right here. Once again, I'm one of your hosts, Trigger Jordan, and with my favorite co-host, Dan. What's up, Dan?
Hey, what's up, Trigger?
You always bring me so much excitement. Hey, literally, I've literally been thinking all week long about what's about to happen, literally right now, with the man, the myth, the legend. When you refer to our guest today, it's almost like talking about Sasquatch, like Bigfoot or unicorns or dragons that exist. But Tony Perez, the man, the myth, the legend himself of Spark and AFWERX, is here with us today. We couldn't be more excited to bring him on. Tony, hello. Say hello to your followers, your fans.
You're too kind, Trigger. And Dan, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So in case you guys don't know, Tony has an extensive background. For right now, he's the director for AFWERX, Spark, the Spark initiative, one of the capability leads, a grassroots innovation program designed to create unique opportunities for the military's operational experts. You know, if you're at a base, that's all about you, to be able to collaborate and really think about the top problems that they have, get our problems as an airman wherever we're at, connected with industry, academia, government, and get connected. But this didn't just happen overnight. I mean, it always takes a pioneer. It always takes an author to stick their neck out and say, we can do this. And the awesome part is we got the man here right now with Tony, where this started back at Travis Air Force Base several years ago. So Tony, just for a second, dive into and tell us, you know, if we were to rewind 4 years ago, things looked drastically different. If you talk about the innovation space, what defense innovation was, take us back there and kind of where this whole mindset started from, because 4 years ago, I didn't know anything about this.
Right. No, that's, this whole innovation space, and especially, the Spark and the grassroots movement. I mean, it goes well before me. It's not a me thing, it's a us thing. It was a lot of other people's whose hard work and dedication before us that why we're able to operate in the space that we do now. So the story that I'll tell is just a small segment of a longer story, and it's from a very one perspective. And so what I think that we have accomplished as a team is happens in pockets all the time. And it's the startup story. Why does one company versus another succeed? And a lot of the time it's there's no equation for it, and that's why the startup market exists like it does. And so so everything that I'll tell you is just kind of like one group of folks that just happen to be lucky, right place, right time, right investors, and that's kind of why we found ourselves here right now. So but I think what the story that I can tell just is from about 2015 timeframe at Travis Air Force Base. And so this was the end of 2015, and this was right around the time where a lot of exciting stuff was happening in the DoD, and a lot of it coming top down. So Secretary Ash Carter was in the seat as SecDef. He was starting things like Defense Innovation Unit. He was starting things like the Defense Innovation Board. And you saw all this excitement, coming from the top down. And this, but at the unit level, because I was just a guy in a flying squadron, for it to reach the bottom, it just seemed like it wasn't happening. And so instead of waiting, and and this is where I think it's a collective effort. Everybody wants in the workforce is excited to participate in the innovation space. We just happen to be particularly well positioned for it. Based on our geographic location, Travis Air Force Base, being close to Silicon Valley, and then some of the leadership at the local level, starting with the squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Mullis, who empowered a band of misfits to go forward and try something. So, but yeah, I mean, it's so there's a lot of ingredients that it started out with, but I think the thing I'd highlight first is you can have a vision of something that you want, but until that first person, that first leader in the chain says, that sounds interesting, and willing to go to his boss and socialize the concept. That's that really first level leader that really empowers it. So that's what we had early on at Travis when we were starting what was called the Travis Innovation Office. That is now kind of the Spark Cell concept within AFWERX.
So I'm curious, like I think that a lot of people can probably relate to that. You said that this happens in pockets all the time, and that first thing that happened was that buy-in at the squadron leadership level. Can you just dig in a little bit to the experience that you were having at that time, and what it was that your leader did that kind of made that first spark kind of happen?
Right. No, I think that's a great question. So, I mean, the first thing is trust, right? So, we have many leaders in the hierarchy of the military. And, for me to feel comfortable to sit down in the meeting, I mean, the specific thing that happened was I was a flight commander at the time. And, typical thing, I was a senior captain. And you got to move on to something else, right? So I was in his office. He's like, "Hey, Tony, what do you want to do next?" And with a straight face, I looked at him and I said, "Sir, I want to be the chief of the innovation office here at Travis Air Force Base." And he started laughing. But he then looked at me once he saw I was serious. He's like, "All right, what do you need? What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
Because it didn't exist. But for me to feel comfortable to bring that up to him because I trusted him, I think trust is the first thing. The other thing, and the other, I think the ingredient, that makes it happen is, you have to be willing to take some risk, right? And I think we artificially create risks in our mind, whether it's professional, whether it's relationship, whether it's organizational. But I mean, you have to be willing to take some risk and hear no. The truth is, I've asked many squadron commanders in my career, I've sold the same concept to them. And this was the first one that really bought into it. And so, so I think it was him believing in it. And then he actually came to my office about 2 hours later after, the initial conversation. He goes, "When do you think you're going to have something ready for the group commander?" And I was like, "Sir, give me 2 weeks. We'll talk to him." And so from that, like that ability for him to trust me to put him, me in front of his boss, I mean, that really meant a lot. And then now, where there's really nothing to lose, but I was motivated to over the next 2 weeks. I read all these pitch books. I did start doing research. I really started digging into it because I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can talk to someone of significance about this. And so like it put me and motivated me and put me in a position to where now I had to put a little bit more meat in the bones before besides just a concept.
I love this story of your first experience being like that, because I got to tell you, my first instinct when I heard about AFWERX as somebody who was like innovating for the last 12, 14 years is I'm like, I don't want to be a part of your system, man. I'm like, this thing's just another part of the Air Force, the larger machine. So I didn't actually believe in it, which is why I find the whole Spark concept so compelling. And your backstory, I think, lends some credibility to that.
Well, and I'm glad you saw that, Dan. And you see that now, and that's something that like very specific, like how we've grown Spark across the Air Force has not been top down at all. Really, we've just seeded an idea, a concept, and allowed individual airmen to build an organization that's going to be valuable to them, their constituents, and their leadership. And so, there's no, the funny thing, and I think a lot of people, I get emails all the time, actually just of like, "Hey, can you send me the reg? Can you send me the org chart? Can you send me like the how to do this?" And, there isn't anything, I can show them ideas. I can show them like what other people have done, but what it's going to work at at Minot Air Force Base versus at Hickam versus at Travis, it's all going to be different. Yeah. And so, how I always look at the concept of Spark and kind of how we started was, we need to treat this thing like a startup. Like, and what do startups do? And so, we have to sell product, we have to generate revenue somehow. And we do that by serving customers. Who's our customer base? Our customer base are the airmen that are executing the mission every day.
Yeah.
Like, that's who we're going to service. Yeah. How are we going to get the ability to do that? Well, now we need investors to give us both money and time in order to accomplish our goal as a startup. And so we have to generate value to the investors, i.e. the leadership within the structure. And then we also have to generate value to our customers, who are the airmen that are executing the mission. And so I think if you look at it through the paradigm of the startup, it really changes things and challenges kind of the traditional mindset of how we create organizations within any bureaucracy, the Air Force being one of those. Yeah. And then another interesting theme on that is, if it is a true startup, it can actually fail, and it should fail if it's not value added. So it is not becoming another layer within the system. Instead, it has to show value in order to sustain itself. So and that's why, you're not going to see very many official documents, if any, on Spark, because it is truly a decentralized network of semi-autonomous nodes and innovation cells. They are alone, independent, and they can choose to work with AFWERX or not. But really, they should work with AFWERX if AFWERX adds value to them. They really need to make business decisions based on value of who they align themselves with. And so I know that was a lot there, so I'll pause.
Well, that's even when you start, because I remember initially when we got the guidance, I can't even say guidance. It was a recommendation within ATC. At the time, General Quas said, "Hey, I'd like each unit to look at starting an innovation unit." I was like, "Great. Where's the exactly what you're talking about? Hey, where's the charter? Where's the guideline? How do we do this thing?" And for the life of me at the moment, it was so frustrating because I was like, I can't find anything on this thing. And I remember my first call with you about it, and you're like, "What's it look like at your base?" I was like, "I don't know. What is this thing?" He was like, "Nobody knows." Tony was like, "I can't define it for you. I can't tell you. It's not intended to be what I define it as. You have to look at your own unit." And Tony, I don't even know if you remember that conversation, but initially it was like, but I need to see a moment of what this looks like. But it really forced you to go back and say, what are your needs that you're dealing with? What are your frustrations? Because your frustrations at your base and your unit are going to be different. Exactly what you said. And that's so important. And even going back to what you said before of, I think every person who gets involved in innovation or in Spark or Spark Cell or get connected to AFWERX or whatever it is, has to go through that journey of that self-empowering of saying, listen, this needs to be done. Like, it's this internal drive, this motivation where you say, I have to do it. If I'm not going to do it, nobody's going to do it. I've got to do it, because that's really what propels you forward. And when you were talking about empowerment, there's a couple times at the Spark Cell workshops we've talked about, if you think the three things that are really critical to enabling a Spark Cell or just enabling a unit or an organization be innovation minded or move forward in this space, the three things that continue to come to my mind is, one, investment. You have to be willing to invest into the initial startup. If you're not willing to invest into it, whether your time or effort or energy or ideas, it's hard to get something to grow. The second one is being empowered, exactly like you said. Your squadron commander empowered you to do it. And lastly, trusting people, releasing them to do it. Like, if you can invest, empower, and release people to go, the sky is the limit. And that's the amazing thing. And I think one of the awesome things about Spark, and not just Spark, but the innovation space as well, when you talk about defense innovation as a whole, is that there intentionally are not bounds put on it, because when you create bounds, you create limitations. And that's what I loved initially in that first conversation. You're trying to get us to see is, I'm not going to give you bounds, because if I tell you this is what it looks like, you're going to stay in this envelope. And the point is, don't stay in the envelope. Go outside of it.
Yeah, and it's an upfront recognition that we actually don't know what an effective innovation organization looks like.
Yeah.
As soon as we've defined it, as soon as we've said this is the structure, is it really relevant? Because the environment is so dynamic in itself. The world is so dynamic. by
Yeah.
unbounding it enables that agility. But the other thing of making it unbounded is you learn and I mean, everybody is basically finding new pathways for their organization, but also the Air Force at large. I mean,
Yeah.
if you find something that actually works, and what you're going to see in a decentralized model of semi-autonomous innovation cells is they'll naturally gravitate towards the model that's working at the time. So, it's very much a teams of teams concept.
Yeah.
And that's how you can iterate faster is by, you have to creatively think about it. And why and how has this model been successful? Well, you could argue that it hasn't been. I mean, that is a reasonable a reasonable viewpoint. However, the counter to that is I would actually say the point in time we are right now with the COVID-19 response. And what we saw over the first days of like work from home and a workforce disconnected from their mothership. We saw wing commanders, we saw leadership, we saw various tiers of folks go to the innovators on their base to say, hey, how do you use Zoom? How do you use Mattermost? How do you set this up? I mean, all the folks setting up their 3D printing shops to do masks and PPE. I saw there's a sweatshop of folks making cloth masks at Cannon Air Force Base. But just they're making heart valves in Eglin. Just to see these folks react and the ability to operate in nebulous environments and be comfortable with that. I mean, that's exactly what this Spark Cell concept and empowering grassroots innovation does, because it is a learned skill. It is not just something that you can just jump right into. And so you have to practice in peacetime in order to be effective during a crisis or wartime or contingency operation.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly, why, whether it's squadron innovation funds, whether it's Spark Cells, whether it's, all these different AFWERX offerings, that's why it matters in peacetime and why you invest when there is no crisis, because during crisis, these are the folks that are going to rise above and be able to operate and lead the community.
Yeah, we were just talking about that last week about how there's just been this, I don't know, I feel like this is the golden era for the Spark Cells right now because they suddenly have this very clear signal of the signal of demand, of the signal of the value that they could create. And so we were kind of musing on it in our previous episode, like how could we retain that? And thing I was positing is that I think that if we improved our discovery capabilities, then we could be creating that signal for ourselves. I think that's where a lot of people struggle. Is they're like, I can throw together a team of innovators who can create stuff, but answering the question of what it is we need to create that's central. If you don't answer that, it doesn't matter how good you are at anything.
Yeah, you're completely right. And this is a fundamental question that startups have to answer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can throw great teams with all these PhDs and backgrounds like Google, Apple, Facebook, but you have to solve a compelling problem in order to be value added to something.
That's a great point for us to be able to dive into of what is it that we're trying to solve and what really does it look like when we come back from our break here in just a second, because there's a lot. Listen, we're literally just in the midst of this COVID crisis happening. It's like the golden area, the golden age for Spark Cells innovation to be taking place. So when we come back from our break, we're going to real quick dive into what does it look like moving forward? What is the problem really we're trying to solve in Spark Cells? Thanks again, once again, for being on the Innovation Edge with the Disruptive AF podcast. We'll be right back.
Times are hard. With the COVID-19 pandemic causing disruption in every aspect of our lives, it can be difficult to know where to spend our time and how to feel like you're making a difference in your community. If you or your business is interested in getting more involved in response efforts, check out the link in the show notes for resources you can use to help support the fight against COVID-19.
Hey, welcome back to DisruptiveAF Podcast. It's me and Trigger Jordan talking to Tony Perez and talking about the Spark cells and the Spark program out of AFWERX. Tony, you were talking about how the Spark cells can get that signal for what value they could be bringing. Can you talk a little bit about the universals that you're seeing, like the successes? How people who want to maybe stand up a Spark cell or already have and are having trouble finding their way, what do you see working now and into the future? How we could continue to get that signal and get it boosted for more airmen to get involved?
Right. So I mean, that's a great question, Dan. So one of the key things I think is and it's like, get out of the office, right? Walk the halls of your unit, of your base, talk to people. And one of the most difficult things I think where people make a lot of missteps is you say, what is your innovative idea, right? And that becomes an intellectual challenge to folks, and it's intimidating. And so because now you're going to qualify whatever I tell you next as, well, that's not innovation because of X, Y, and Z, or oh, well, that's not that good. So more fundamentally, like, I actually don't care about your innovative idea. It's what problem do you have that you would like solved? And to put it in a very crass way is, hey, what sucks in your life? What sucks in your work life? And people will talk your ear off about what sucks in their work life. But then, to your point, Dan, that you brought up earlier, you as the Spark Cell lead, the innovator, whatever, you can take that what sucks and then distill it into a productive problem statement that then can be addressed.
Yeah, one of my favorite expressions for that and what drives good innovation is it's all about falling in love with a problem, not falling in love with a solution.
100%. And that's another misstep that you bring up that people take. They say, "Oh, we want drones on the base." Well, what are these drones going to do?
Yeah.
And, like what problem do they fundamentally solve? So you don't end up with just like a closet full of drones that is collecting dust, because then now now it is like now the critics are right. Like, oh,
well, and how many times has that happened? How many times has that happened where we have closets and inventory full of stuff that was a good idea somewhere? And I think, man, Dan, you bring up a really, really great point. Tony, you as well, where you say we used to get so connected and tied into the solution, and we should be focused on the solution. You're right. You got to focus on the problem. May the best solution win. But sometimes people get so invested into the time and the research that they've done that it becomes more important to them to get their idea through instead of the best idea through. And there's a difference between those things.
Right. And one way, because I mean, there's all these psychological biases to why you would stick to something that you started with. But how you get across those is very much in the lean startup methodology literature, where you need to have short iterative cycles, and don't do small experiments with MVPs, minimum viable products, in order to test hypotheses. And if you have those short iterative cycles, you'll be less likely to go after the Lamborghini when a bike would have been just fine.
Yeah.
So and then also as far as your approach and kind of what problems you go after with solutions. I mean, if you're kind of taking iterative the iterative MVP kind of methodology, theoretically the investment in those prototypes should be very small. So you can spread your capital or your funding, if you're lucky enough to have it, across many different experiments in order to have a diversified portfolio of activity, which the percentages that the chances of any one of those projects in your portfolio to succeed is actually pretty low. But if you aggregate those together, very much like a VC holds portfolios of companies, that one project in your portfolio is going to have a nonlinear upside in returns, and that's going to prove out your methods in binary wins to gain more support.
Yeah. So this reminds me of something that I've thought about a lot with innovation organizations. Is I think oftentimes they attract the technically minded people who love building solutions, right? So they're kind of in a lane, right? You're like, I'm a coder, or I print stuff, right? One thing that I've found useful is because I've like been studying design thinking and facilitation of these, lean startup, ICOR, human-centered design. I just took the warfighter-centered design from the Centers for Adaptive Warfighting. It's amazing. And one of the reasons that I'm trying to promote this stuff with my latest project, Agitare, is that I think you need somebody there whose primary focus is, are we solving the right problem? It's not, it's not the technically minded people. So I think this speaks to the importance of having a diverse team as part of those sparks.
And yes, this is not a one-person gig. None of this stuff is. It does take a true teams of teams that is cross-functional in nature. But just in very broad terms, I think Apple is always, the classic example of the Steve Wozniak and the Steve Jobs, right? Yeah. So, and I think that speaks very clearly to the point that, there's going to be technically minded people that are going to do the tinkering, the makers of the world, right? But so the great point of, Apple, I think, is the classic example where you have both a Steve Wozniak and a Steve Jobs. One very much that maker, tinker, or a coder type person, but then you have the Steve Jobs, who's kind of the, the managerial and business functions. And so those team of folks that need to come together, more specifically underneath the Air Force paradigm, and just with the rules and regulations that we have to adhere to, because all the activities, you want to do above board, is, hey, who's your FMer? Who's your contracting person? Yeah. Who's your legal rep? Who do you know from CE? Who do you know from PA? Like, these are all people it needs to be the right person from these organizations, and you might not find them locally, but you should be looking at these places because, at the end of the day, we live within an organization that has rules, and we have to live with those if we're going to have the freedoms to operate in the sandbox that we all want to.
Yeah. And that's been one area that, whether it's Spark Cells or even just kind of innovation hubs and groups, is that unfortunately, I think that's been a lesson that has been learned a little bit too late at times, that if you have a project started, man, you need to bring these people on board early and often, because they can actually help you sort through things in the developmental process and recognize what they need to get going, what they need to be doing on their half to expedite the development, or expedite the process, or expedite the project. But oftentimes I've seen people wait where they have this great idea, and then they go bring in whether it's contracting or FM or JAG to be able to say, hey, is this okay? And then they find themselves being delayed because they weren't involved in the process earlier. And you may say to yourself, well, what does a technology have anything to do with FM or contracting? It has a lot to do with it, especially if you want to see this thing scale and solve the everyday problem that your airmen are having, or whoever is having. There's a lot that goes into it. They need to be in that process.
Yeah, and it really is. And, and this is where I think, where tensions develop, right? You have conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is unintended. And, for the innovators, you're like, the frozen middle. That's the classic excuse, right? Yeah. Oh, the frozen middle. I can't get it, across the goal line because of the frozen middle. Well, instead of pointing fingers and throwing spears, because a lot of those are excuses, right?
Yeah.
And you don't have control over that. So what in your world do you have control over that you can change? And a lot of that has to go to communicating to these organizations early, right? So,
yes.
A lot of the things that get that where you find roadblocks is, had you just communicated and got these folks on board earlier, then and this is where I want people to realize is, these aren't supporting agencies. These are enabling agencies and organizations. They enable the innovations to happen, and they need to be on your team from the very beginning. And so, you know, the myth of the frozen middle, a lot of it is self-driven because of our inability to understand the landscape in which we operate.
Yeah.
And you know, and along the same lines, PA is very important. Who has the wing commander's ear, you know, directly? It's
Yeah.
PA. So as you're trying to develop what your spark cell is going to do, your PA shop can give you insight on the wing commander's priorities, and then you can align to those to where it becomes very difficult to say no to the concept that you want to promote.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of times people, I think they find the quote unquote the roadblock is because if they hadn't pulled those agencies in earlier, those agencies don't know what your problem is. They don't understand what your frustration is. And what you don't realize is that these enabling agencies want to enable you to succeed. And there's meetings that happen all over the place. So if FM goes into a meeting, whether it's with if it's a base, FM is dealing with the numbered Air Force, the magic, they may be hearing about things that would be advantageous to you. But if they don't know what your frustration is, if they don't know your pain point, they don't know to watch out for it. They can. They're there to be able to help you. Dan, you had something though.
Yeah, and then like just to scale the idea of that, you need to build trust between your organization and their leadership. I also one thing that I saw missing in early discussions when we were looking at the innovation center for my previous wing was I came in and I was like, who's talking about communication? Who's talking about like what our communication plan is, our collaboration plan? Because if we're not scaling that push for trust across the whole organization, there's a lot of people who are just going to drag their feet because they're not sold on the value of this thing. So I see the most successful innovation organizations are the ones who tell the most compelling story about what they're doing. Yeah. And when we one of the most successful things that we did at that office was I started doing a monthly newsletter, and it was a ton of work. I mean, a friend, we made it weird. We made it super strange. There were all kinds of cartoons. We did these design thinking sessions and worst possible solution. And then we did cartoons of all the terrible solutions to the problem of not being able to read officers' ranks. And it was like a lot of fun. And we made it look strange and different. And it kind of sent this signal, and out of the woodwork came all these airmen who were like, oh yeah, I saw the newsletter and I recognized that something like that spoke to me is happening here. So that atypical or that non-traditional PA function for innovation organizations, I see doing way more than anybody anticipates it doing.
Right. And talking about that, it's if you're just starting out with a spark cell, it's like, how do you get started? What's the plan? How do you build your team? And a lot of that, so thinking about non-traditional ways to actually build a team in this day and age is actually just walking around and talking to people.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, one of the key things that we did at Travis. I remember just walking the halls of random squadrons and just introducing myself and just talking to them. We're so used to email correspondence. We're so used to these distro list blasts that are just, mute. They're just filtered out in our mind. It's that human to human interaction in talking to people. That's even though it sounds very simple, that is a simple way to differentiate yourself from other organizations.
Yeah. I've read that in so many books about innovation, this idea of walking around. It's very weird. It's it's called Get Out in the Think Wrong practice. It's called Get Out of the Building in some design thinking frameworks. So I also am curious though, you talked about what if you don't have those capabilities locally. So one of the things that the Spark network is it's a community, right? Or AFWERX creates this sort of network. Can you talk about how people can connect with people in the innovation space that aren't within walking distance?
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, first off, anybody can email me, call me whenever you want. It's an open door. So Tony.Perez@afwerx.af.mil. Cell phone 719-310-2240. you can reach out to me. I'll talk to anybody. The other thing though is, there's so it's always a balance. Like, we want to publicize, but then also there are people that want to destroy. So, how do we and then also just with all the companies trying to reach these Spark cells, we limit the access of some of the distro lists we have. So I mean, I think the best ways, ask around, keep your look at like different bases, look at different activities locally. Reach out to me. I'll send you the distro list with all the various Spark cells in different innovation, base level innovation organizations out there. There's over 70 that we have cataloged, and then just start reaching out to different people. I mean, picking up a phone and talking to someone, emailing them. I think the phone calls are valuable because there's so much nuance in this space to where, just from Trigger and I's original conversation, whenever we first talk, it's like, it starts with disbelief. Like, what? There's no reg that dictates this. Like, there's no,
dude, it was so frustrating until you get it, and then you're like,
yeah. And then once you reach out and talk to a couple of these folks in the space, there's more and more and more. And, I think we've hit this inflection point where, it's going to be easier to reach these folks because it's not going to be as strange to be operating in this space. So, and you'd be surprised who operates in this space. So, AFWERX, DEF's another good organization that's nationally, around nationally. So, Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, Ensign, National Security Innovation Network. That's an OSD organization. That's government. DIU. There's a lot of innovation organizations out there. The Spark Network I think is good because that's other airmen that are in government right now that can empathize with you directly. But yeah, just start looking online, Google stuff, start calling people, and get involved.
Yeah, and I think one of the critical things about that is you've mentioned this thus far is just get going. Just get going. If you have questions about it, if you're wanting to get connected, just pick up the phone, find an email, and reach out to somebody and just get going. Because a lot of times people think in their planning or wanting to build or wanting to get moving on a project or start this innovation mindset that they need the right environment, they need this, they need that lined up. Man, did you wait to have everything lined up perfectly?
And it's never going to be perfect.
No, it's not.
So you have to execute on good enough.
Yeah.
And what's good enough? Like, good enough is, hey, what's your 70 to 80% solution, right? You're not going to be right. And you have to be comfortable with that. You are going to be wrong a lot of the times. And that's okay. If we would have waited till right, for any of the activity we do within Spark, back at Travis, I mean, what we've done in Cyber, with what we've done with the accelerator, with what we're doing supporting the COVID-19 task force. Yeah. If we would have waited for right, then or perfect, we'd still be back in the starting block. Yeah. So, and what you have to exhibit, and this is what Dr. Jeff DeGraff talks about, is self-authorizing behaviors. And so, that's who's going to thrive in the space. Do you need permission? I'm telling you right now, no, you don't. Be ethical, be moral, don't hurt anybody, don't break any laws.
Yeah.
So what's the rule book for Spark? What's the rule book for the innovation? I mean, we have to go no further than the Air Force core values.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible what you can accomplish without breaking laws. Just get started failing early, because you got a lot of failure to do before you're going to start seeing major successes. I think, like every time you have to pivot, the last thing was kind of a failure, but it's not, it shouldn't stop you. I think there's a lot of people who start things and then they're like, oh, I realized that the environment wasn't ready for it, or I realized that it wasn't going to work because of this and this. And because they never pivot, there was just the one shot. And they think that things that succeed were just right the first time that somebody.
Yeah, they were destined for it. They were set up in the right environment. Yeah, that's something you had mentioned, Tony. I think is really. Have you heard the Gitmo principle? Have you heard of that?
No.
Good enough to move on. Gitmo.
There you
Good
go.
enough to move on. The Gitmo principle is good enough to move on. And actually, it really drove me nuts until I had a conversation with an architect. They said, dude, if you could spend years on developmental, on architectural plans for buildings, but you have to get to the 85% rule. It is 85% correct. Everything meets code like it needs to, because you could spend way more time and effort than it's worth and not get the return on investment if you go that last 15%. Good enough to move on. Get started. You have the idea in your head. Move forward. Get it done. Which I think really, really, when we think about it, just as we wrap our mind around kind of our closing shot of what would you like people to know before we get out of here and Dan closes this out, keeping that in mind, just get going, just get moving, just get started. Just get headed in a direction. Don't allow things to slow you down. Just get going. So Tony, in that mindset, what would you want people to know? What is the most important thing that you can pass to them in this innovation mindset spark space, if you will?
So, I mean, first off, it's not for everybody, right? It's available to everybody, but it's not for everybody. All right. So, and that's okay. And so, but my guess is if you clicked on this link and download this podcast and are listening, you know, you are probably of a belief that there is something in this innovation space for you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's something that you can do today in order to get started? So you have my email, you have my phone number. Give me a call, shoot me a text. Like, hey, Tony, we want to talk. If that is a very easy thing, and I'll respond to you, and we can just start talking, and that could be your first step. So shoot me a text. If that's what you want to be your first step, do that. Text me, 719-310-2240. Get on the website, AFWERX at af.mil.
Yeah.
I mean, start looking at stuff. Reach out to folks around your base, around your community. Start talking to people. You know, these are small things that you can do in order to, you know, dip your toe in and to get you started kind of on this journey.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful message. Is the first thing that, and the easiest thing that anybody could do is just get connected, right? Because these things are springing up everywhere. These people are kind of all around us, just coming out of the woodwork, and that's kind of the power of the Spark program. I'd also like to take a second to pitch that we've got this Platform One Mattermost space that we've got a bunch of the Spark cells on. And it's a joint space, so we've got a lot of collaboration going on there. You know, shoot us a message if you want to find out how to get involved there. But you know, get into the community and get started. Hey, thanks so much, Tony, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation. I love hearing your story, and I trust the Spark program a little more, knowing it's coming from somebody with your background.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it, Trigger, Dan. You know, thanks for putting this podcast together. Really enjoyed being here.
Good. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in to the DisruptAF Podcast. It's your innovation edge right here. Make sure you tune in next week because we have Stacy Schafferin coming up from AFPC Public Affairs, who's also been in the defense innovation ecosystem. So make sure you subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Just click that link right over there. Hit the notification bell so you can get updated information. And if you're on listening to podcast audio, you can listen to this anywhere podcasts are available. We'll check you out later. From Trigger, Dan, and Tony, thanks for watching Disruptive AF.